Welcome to Mac Talk, a Middle Tennessee podcast from Mont Haven Arts and Cultural Center in Hendersonville, Tennessee. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Centerpoint Wines and Liquors in Hendersonville. I'm your announcer, Jim Black. Nashville is known around the world as Music City, but it's also known as the Athens of the South. That nickname is partly due to the city's devotion to higher learning, but it's also due to Tennessee's glorious state capitol building, famously created in Greek Revival style. Our guest today knows a thing or two about Nashville architecture. He's Kem Hinton, a lead designer of Tennessee's celebrated Bicentennial Mall. Kem is here today to speak with the MAC's Chief Operating Officer, John Pitcher, about the Bicentennial Mall. So John, take it away.
Thank you, Jim, and Kem, welcome to Mac Talk. Kem, you have a terrific book out about Tennessee's Bicentennial Mall, which is that wonderful 19-acre park north of the state capitol building, which was, of course, created to celebrate Tennessee's 200th anniversary, joining the Union. There are a lot of great parts of the book. The character I found to be most fascinating was William Strickland, the architect who came here in around 1845 to create this amazing building. Around that time, a little bit later, maybe the early 1850s, a journalist from New York who eventually became a legendary landscape architect, Frederick Law Olmsted, actually visited this area. He was writing for the New York Daily News, and he described this place as being really the West.
Oh, yeah.
It was the frontier.
Tennessee was, in fact, it has a lot to do with Strickland's acceptance of the commission. Strickland, it's kind of romanticized that he came here to do his finest big project, which it was, the state capitol. But I think he was really kind of a mixture of, after he finished several projects in Philadelphia, particularly the Merchants Exchange building, which has a tower on top of it that's very similar to the tower on top of our state capitol. After he finished that and did some other things, he traveled through Europe. He had some financial investments, and I think he lost a lot of money. He was also in the running to do a revised design for the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C. Robert Mills won the competition, but a lot of people didn't like the solution, and there was a senator from New York that found Strickland and said, "Would you design an alternative for the Washington Monument?" It was nowhere as good as Robert Mills. And then the other thing is, he was trying to get the job to do the expansion of the United States Capitol, and he lost that to a former student named Usric. So he was asked in like 1844 to come to Nashville and do the state capitol. But this is a very sophisticated man. He'd been in Europe, he'd been in the Northeast, and he was popular, very socialite guy, really talented. And coming to Nashville is kind of like going out of the boonies. I mean, Nashville was still...
Well, you weren't going to catch a JetBlue flight down here then. I mean, that was a trip.
Oh, it was rough. And really, it was considered the West. Obviously, the West extends our nation to the Pacific. But he came to the town, and, it was a really, really outpost kind of city. And of course, there was slavery. There were a lot of things that he just found, man, this is really strange. But they were offering him the commission, and after several letters, he decided to come. He presented a design, and he said it would be built in 2 or 3 years, and it took forever for it to be done. So his time in Nashville was real challenging. Of course, he designed several buildings, the Egyptian Revival, Presbyterian Church, and other things. But he never made Nashville his home. I think he lived in a hotel the whole time.
Right. Well, tell me a little bit about what made Strickland special, because he was a specialist in Greek Revival, and speak also a little bit about the sort of crowning achievement on top of our capital.
Well, Strickland was really noted for his ability to craft significant monuments based on historic precedents. So Greek Revival was something that he jumped on early. He designed the second bank in Philadelphia, and then he did this Merchants Exchange building. Both of them were highly classical Greek Revival buildings, but he also had extraordinary talent, and he was well read. And so when he did the Presbyterian Church, now the Downtown Presbyterian Church, it was because he understood everything. He had information, he had drawings, he had books, and so he could do that style along with doing classical styles like Greek Revival. Doing the state capitol, though, was incredible because it's basically a Greek temple with columns on it because that's fashionable. Greek Revival kind of distanced America from England because we had inherited democracy.
Right.
And so we were going to make this was accepted across the nation, we will make our civic buildings look like Greek structures.
Because they invented
look like democratic structures. And so that's why so many buildings in our nation, and particularly courthouses and state houses, look like they're influenced by the Greeks. But what he did that was so amazing, he did this in Philadelphia. He took a Greek temple design and then he put something on top of it that was a Greek monument, a solid Greek monument. In his case, he made it an open, like a lantern. But it was based on something in Athens called the Choragic Monument of the Socrates. Now, when I say that, it's choragic, like courage, and most people say, yes, courage. No, that's not right. Choragic means chorus. And what Strickland did is he had discovered this monument, and others had too, and had documented it in drawings and everything, that it was a monument to, think about ancient Greece. What do you do every day? You get up, you fight, you have athletics, you have huge theatrical events, and you sing.
Right.
So these guys having time, and I'm sure women did it the same thing, they would form these large choruses, and they would have battles.
Right.
You know, who's the best singers?
Right. Well, Homer was essentially a singer, songwriter, storyteller.
That's right.
He'd sit around the fireplace and he'd recount the Iliad.
And so you can imagine the ability to sing and the ability to lead singers becomes very, I mean, you don't have TV, you don't have radio, and you could do that at night. Anyway, so he placed this enlarged version of this solid memorial. He placed it as sort of a lantern or a cupola on top of our state capitol. It had only been done once before in Philadelphia, so he does it again here. What is amazing to me is that on top of the most important building in the state of Tennessee, which is our state capitol, is a music monument.
Right.
And
to a place that became Music City.
And Music City. And it's sitting on top. So I want everybody, you know, when they drive downtown to look at it, because it's a glorious tower. It's so nice. And the state capitol has had all its limestone replaced since the time of in the 1950s, they had to replace all the limestone on the outside because it was Tennessee limestone that was falling apart. So they replaced it with Indiana limestone.
And when this was built, I believe in reading your book, this was like the building in the South, right? This was the largest and most impressive building in the South?
I don't know that it was the largest building, but I'm absolutely sure it was the tallest building. Of course, it was on the tallest hill in Nashville. Right. And there was nothing like it in the South that I'm aware of. And when it was he designed in 1845, it was finished. They started using it in 1854, but it really wasn't completely finished until 1859. But when the Civil War erupted and the Union showed up in Nashville in 1862, there were huge numbers of federal troops here. They were camped out north of the Capitol, a flat area, and they would write home to their relatives saying, "You cannot believe this thing that's on top of this hill." Also, the Confederacy knew of the power of the building, so they put it on their Confederate notes, the $20 note in 1862 and again in 1864. And so the building, a representation of the building, an etching of it, is on the currency. It doesn't say what the building is. It just shows that, the South, we have done this. We are for real. And there were only two other buildings shown on Confederate currency. And this was vastly larger than anything else shown.
Right. And this was not a building you'd find in many places. It was a very innovative structure. Well, let me ask you, you are the lead designer for the Bicentennial Mall, which I relate to a lot. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, so I spent a lot of time on the National Mall, a lot of time going to the Smithsonian. How did you get involved in this amazing project?
It's a very interesting story. Our firm, Tuck Hinton Architects, was working with a landscape firm called Hodgson and Douglas. We were selected to do a downtown plan. It's called the Sub-Area 9 plan, but what it means is a new downtown plan for the Metropolitan Development Housing Agency, the people in charge of the city's kind of evolution, and the planning department. So we were asked to do this. Well, one of the things we did is meet with state officials on what is the state, because they have so many buildings and so much property. And we met with them, and the state architect showed me a scheme. The state needed more office space, and they had contacted a very well-known architect out of New York, Robert Lamb Hart, who had designed Metro Center and some other things. They'd asked him to figure out what to do, and he proposed putting office buildings on the north slope of Capitol Hill, with a huge plaza that went over James Robertson Parkway and over the top of the railroad tracks that are directly north. And you can't mess with the railroad, so he had a big plaza. When he showed it to us as a courtesy, we really told him this is not a good idea. Of course, he said, well, what would you do? And so because of that, someone had suggested the idea of doing a linear park north of the Capitol. It was a guy named Victor Johnson, who was the founder of Aladdin Industries. And his cohort, John Bridges, John was an inventor, incredible inventor, invented a lot of the things that Aladdin made. And so they worked as a team. Victor Johnson was more like the guy's guy that would meet with high-ranking officials, and John was the one to figure out a lot of complicated things to do. Anyway, they proposed this linear park facing the Capitol on this low-lying land north of the Capitol. And it showed like a little fountain and stuff like that. It would just be a park. Well, we said we like that. We think that's a strong idea. You need to do some other things. You need to improve Capitol Hill. It had parking on the north side. You need to fix up James Robertson Parkway. Most importantly, we thought you should just penetrate the railroad berm, because the rail lines at this time were up on a raised berm. Originally, they were on a wood trestle, but at the turn of the century, instead of replacing the wood trestle because it was falling apart, they just piled dirt under it. And if you're ever in this part of Nashville, north and northwest of the state capitol, you'll realize the rail lines are up on this tall berm. It's like 15 to 20 feet tall. And it really created kind of a scar across the northwest side below the Capitol. You're on the right side or the wrong side of the railroad tracks, so to speak. Anyway, that rail line had to be there. What we proposed is to reinstall a trestle so that you could walk under the railroad tracks and into this linear park. Now, that was kind of we had these basic ideas. The other idea was that the park needed to go all the way to Jefferson Street. Jefferson Street is the next major road from James Robertson Parkway up to Jefferson Street. Jefferson Street, very important street and avenue for historic black culture and music.
And from that street, if you have this park, you have this wonderful view.
That's right. And when you're on that road, which is a busy road, you will have a glimpse, a very carefully made linear view right on the state capitol. You'll know what you're looking at because it is the highlight. And actually, so as we started, we were asked then, okay, something happened. The state all of a sudden didn't need as many office buildings because in the middle of when we were trying to figure this out, Jerry Preston called me and said, well, we don't need a lot of office buildings out there. They were going to build like 2 and 3 level office buildings all the way on the sides to animate the park. We're not going to do that, he said, because I said, why? Well, we bought the American General building. I said, what? He said, we bought the American General building. They're moving out to Brentwood. I said, Jerry, that's the most expensive per square foot building ever built in Nashville. 31 stories, travertine on the outside, terrazzo inside, incredible paneling, escalators. It is a superb place for people to work. And he said, I know, we got it for a song and a dance. So when you think about state government doing something very smart, that was really smart.
Right.
By the way,
and it solved their space problem.
What?
I said solve their space problem big time.
Forever,
yeah.
You would think. And anyway, so the state, that's where so many departments are now. Well, because of that, this linear park, well, if it was a linear park, just a lawn and had some fountains and a bunch of trees, yeah, it'd be fine. It'd be fine for the neighborhood. But we kept thinking, well, first of all, we were convinced the city to move Farmers Market to the side to 8th Avenue. They were going to move the market downtown. Mayor Bredesen wanted to move them downtown. We said, well, and the farmers market, people liked kind of being in that area, although the existing farmers market is just a bunch of open sheds, so during the winter, nothing goes on. So we said, well, we'll place the farmers market between 7th and 8th Avenue and get that built. And then when it's built, we take down the sheds that block the view from Jefferson Street. And what really happened is we had this assignment. How do we make this park a special thing about Tennessee? And we ended up with a theme. This happened after I traveled all over the state with the Bicentennial Commission. This commission, the big party was going to happen in June of 1996. Martha Ingram was the chairman of the commission, and the co-chairman happened to be our vice president, Al Gore, and from Tennessee. That perturbed Governor Sundquist when he came into power, but that's the politics. But what we did is to speak with people around the state, and then I made a lot of phone calls to people that I'd met in graduate school, people from Japan, Greece, Brazil, France, and just talk to them about when you hear the word Tennessee, and they would say things like Elvis, music, country music, but then they'd say other things like Oak Ridge. And if they were, they're well educated, they talk about, well, you had these presidents that came from your state, particularly Jackson and Polk and then Johnson. And so the state, and of course then the Civil War occurred here, and so many of the battles were fought here. So with that, of course, the music industry, music as just something we have, and then looking at Tennessee as a piece of dirt is awesome, because the west side of Tennessee is defined by nature, the Mississippi River. The east side of Tennessee is defined by nature in the form of mountains, the second highest mountains on the continent. You have these two natural barriers. And then on the north and south, you have basically survey lines. Some surveyor made the lines. So, and we had this great sort of parallelogram. And it's like you called God one afternoon and you said, God, I would really like you to give me like a slice of pizza that's got everything in it that's wonderful in the eastern part of the United States. And he said, well, you'd like, flat areas near a river, you'd like kind of a basin, you want me to throw in a couple of plateaus in there? I'll throw in some mountains and a lot of vegetation, everything you can imagine from one end to the other. Yeah, it's a parallelogram. Let's call it Tennessee. So when you put that together with music and then the history of the state and its people, we developed a theme for the park, and it was the land, the people, and the music of Tennessee. Sounds very simple. And then the challenge was, how do we show that? And that evolved into incredible discussions about what was the best way to do it. I had worked for an architect in Philadelphia. I went to graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania. I got my architectural degree at the University of Tennessee, and I was already a landscape architect, not a landscape architect. I was an architect, registered architect before I went back to graduate school, but I really wanted to see the Northeast. So I got accepted at Penn, went to Philadelphia. While I was there, I worked part-time with an architect named Bob Ventura. And he had designed something in Washington, D.C. that's called Freedom Plaza or whatever. It doesn't work really well as a plaza, but it's got this really wonderful map of Washington the way that was originally conceived by Pierre L'Enfant, who laid out the city. And I thought, we could do that with Tennessee. So we proposed a large map, and it's pretty big. It's probably the biggest state map in the nation.
And I should say that the Bicentennial Mall is a little different from some urban parks in that, in a lot of ways, and what I love about it so much is that it's also like an outdoor museum. The way you have presented it and the way you've told that story. There is that Tennessee Plaza with the wonderful map. There is the amphitheater. Thank you, Martha Ingram. You have your court of 3 stars, which has the wonderful bell carillon. What is your favorite part?
Well, back a little bit. One of the reasons you nailed it when you said a museum, because we were kind of challenged to create something that is interesting enough that people would come there just to come there and spend time. And what we wanted is for them to spend time and learn about Tennessee. Right. So there's an area about the counties and vegetation, and there's an area about the history. You asked a very good question. What's my favorite part? Well, the most thrilling part was to do the carillon because my father was a music instructor at MTSU, had his doctorate in music education, and I worked with him on the arrangements of the Tennessee Waltz that are played at the carillon. 95 bells on 50 columns. But probably the most meaningful project that I'll ever design was the Tennessee World War II Memorial.
Okay.
They were going to build a statue on the north side of Capitol Hill, just a two-figure statue. And Mike Fitz, the state architect, asked me about it. We started talking. I said, that's not a good place. It's even worse up there now because this is before 9/11. And getting up to the Capitol, it's very guarded now. We need a place where veterans can come, particularly in wheelchairs or whatever. So we crafted that space to be something, and working with the veterans from World War II was amazing, and they're all now gone.
Yeah. Well, my favorite embellishment, maybe, I don't know if it's what you would call it, but I love the answering bell with Paul Harmon's art. That is just such a special call and response. Perfect way to sum up music in the old music, new music in Tennessee.
Yeah,
I love that feature so much. I think I like the contemplative part of the park too, just walking around and just being with the place and being with nature. But I love that answering.
Well, I'm glad you feel that way. It's interesting because I was asked to present the park several times. People didn't know what it was going to be. A lot of people thought it was a shopping mall, going to be a shopping mall. In fact, I got an escalator catalog in the mail saying, we'd like our escalators in your new Bicentennial Mall shopping center. One of the things that I presented one time was showing an image and saying this carillon represents the voices of people. 95 bells, 95 counties. And that we need it to be answered up on Capitol Hill.
Right.
So that is actually what happened with the 96th bell. And as you noted, Paul Harmon, who's a great friend and an internationally recognized artist, he and I worked on it, and I challenged him to do these. This is an adaptation of something that's in Athens, Greece, called the Tower of the Winds, where on the top there are like 8 winds of Athens. They're male angelic figures. And here we wanted to do the kind of angels of music, or we call them the musics.
Right.
And there's 8 of them, and one for rock music, classical, blues, bluegrass, country, jazz, all that. And they're at the base. And then on top is the biggest bell in Nashville. It's 5 feet in diameter.
Right. And that's such a great summation of music in Nashville. In Nashville, Queen Victoria heard the Fisk Jubilee Singers once, in England.
This must be a musical city.
Yeah. So, and of course, now we all think of, our latest country music people. We did a interactive thing with some music students from China that was live on the internet, and we had some musicians here in Nashville, and they were playing, and when the Chinese students learned that this was Nashville, the first question that came out of their mouth was, do you know Taylor Swift? These are kids in China. So everybody knows Nashville, and everybody knows it for what we are. We're a music city.
Well, then at the base of the columns at the Carillon, of course, 3 stars, are engraved names of people that have had great influence. And it's not just somebody like Patsy Cline or Elvis or Bill Monroe, but it's people in classical music, John Work, and others. And of course, Taylor Swift will eventually be there.
Right.
I think they put the name on only after you're gone, but there's room for many more names to be added. This park is not stagnant. It needs to continue to sort of evolve. One of the things I've been talking to state government about is we need an extension of the history wall, because the history on that 1,400 foot long wall that's engraved in granite, it ends in 1996. Well, a lot of things have happened since 1996, like 25 years or more. So, and I've got a couple ideas on how that can be done, and so that I'm hoping that will show up.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of static or just having other features there, we also have now the Tennessee State Museum, which is adjunct, and we have the library and archive. Tell me a little bit about that thinking, because that's very Smithsonian-like and very National Mall-like.
Well, if you think about this model that's in Washington, our National Mall, that most people have been to and know. Of course, it's really an open lawn, but beside it are these great museums. Well, when we first did this design, we thought, maybe there might be, museums or a new state museum out there. when we first did the project, and it was dedicated in 1996, it was a pretty big hit. People started liking it, and the state decided to do a new master plan, and we assisted on that. And they decided, well, we're going to build a new state museum out there, and we're going to build the new library and archives. Actually, Governor Bredesen was approached by a group that was going to do a new music museum, an African-American music museum. Right. And we designed that for the corner of Jefferson and 8th. And we had a wonderful design. It was really so cool.
It would have been a really great location for it, too.
Had a huge glass drum, because drums were prohibited. Slaves could not have drums because they make too much noise. And anyway, they weren't able to really raise the money, and so they ended up moving downtown under 5th and Broad development. They're downstairs in that building. But we had worked on the library and archives, which we worked on. Our firm, Tuck Hinton, did that with Thomas Miller Partners, TMP. And then then the museum shows up. We had designed the library and archives, but Governor Haslam decided it would be better to go ahead and design and build a new state museum. And absolutely right, because it draws tourists, whereas the library and archives is a research center. So the new state museum was designed by EOA Architects in Nashville with a firm out of Minneapolis that had done several state museums. Okay. And it was finished in 2018, and then the mall, library and archives was finished in 2021. So what you end up with, believe it or not, is this place. It's a cultural destination. Who would have ever thought this would really happen? And I'm the dumbest guy in the room, because I should have bought land north of the state capitol in Germantown and further north in Salem Town, because all of a sudden with the ballpark and other things, that validity of that whole area and historic Germantown just took off. And now it's hopefully, I'm there frequently just walking through the place, and I give a lot of tours. By the way, if people are interested in a tour, get a group together, just contact me, and
absolutely.
I took a group through the mall yesterday. It was raining, but we had the most fun, and everybody had umbrellas and everything. On Pleasant Day, it's a good hour-and-a-half tour.
All right, wonderful. Well, I think we have time for maybe one more question. Let me ask you, what are you most proud about with that mall?
Well, the thing I'm most proud about, I mentioned the World War II Memorial. I'm proud that we have honored Strickland in a very, very strong way. Every element at the park, there are usually pairs of elements. There are 2 flagpoles. There are 2 railroad embankments. There are 2 pathways, pathway of volunteers. There are 2 edges. The columns open up to frame the Capitol. And we have Tennessee flags in the mall, but the United States flag is on top of the entire composition. It's on top of the cupola, on top of the Capitol, state Capitol. So when I drive by and look, I think, I hope when I die, I run into William Strickland and see what he has to say.
Okay. Well, Kem Hinton, author of Tennessee's Bicentennial Mall and the lead designer for this mall, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Mac Talk, a Middle Tennessee podcast from Mont Haven Arts and Cultural Center in Hendersonville. Today's episode was brought to you by Centerpoint Wines and Liquors. Our guest today was Kem Hinton, the lead designer of Tennessee's Bicentennial Mall. Our podcast was written by Nashville composer Christina Spinay. Our producer is Jonah Pitcher. I'm your announcer, Jim Black, and we'll see you next time.